Hello! Today was bring your topic jar to work day. So here we are in the parking lot of my office, and we'll be able to see if anybody comes out to interrupt my video. And there will be no animal chaos today, so that's cool. Of course, I choose the one topic that I literally can't do when I'm not home. We'll put that one back. We're gonna put this one back. We'll have to do that later. Gonna pick a different one. That's so funny. Okay. Ooh, okay. Not very focused. That's okay. So, this is a book that I read, actually listened to. I listened to it on Audible, I think. It's called What My Bones Know. I think the author's name was like Stephanie something. I'll link the book. Wow. I spilled water on myself like 2 minutes ago. That's what that is. So I listened to this book, probably like a year ago, and it is one of my favorites. Nonfiction. It's like a memoir about the author's journey healing from complex PTSD from some pretty serious childhood abuse. And I loved several things about this book. One really cool thing about the audiobook in particular is that she included actual recordings of some of her sessions with one of her therapists, which is just so cool. Like when you're sharing your story about healing from trauma, I mean, really, if you're sharing your story about anything, it's really easy for your own perception of what that storyline was and what the important parts of it were to not necessarily reflect reality. Not through anything like malicious or devious, just because like so much happens, so much happens in reality, and our brains aren't always good at picking out what the important bits were, or to make reality into a coherent narrative, you necessarily have to emphasize certain things and de-emphasize others. And like having little snapshots of like just clearly documented, this conversation happened, this interaction happened, this is exactly how I was feeling on this day in response to this. Like, this is a reason that I'm such a huge proponent of journaling, because that gives you those real snapshots in time versus just what you recall and how your brain has constructed the story. So anyway, like having those recorded conversations with her and her therapist was very, very cool. She also narrated the audiobook herself, which is like really neat because it just, it's her telling her story. But so I don't have complex PTSD, I don't have childhood trauma, but this book was so relatable in the way that she just the fact that there's no clear answer, there's no clear path. And she started down her healing journey because her mental health and physical health just got to a point where she was no longer able to function well, after like previously being a very like high functioning, very successful, like outwardly successful person, like in her career and in her relationships and everything. Maybe not in her relationships, I might be stating that wrong. But yeah, like just like she talks about all of the different doctors that she went to and talked to, all the different therapists that she talked to, all of the different like therapy and other healing modalities that she tried, like meditation and acupuncture and breath work and this type of therapy and that type of therapy, and just trying so many different things, experiencing benefits from something, but then feeling stuck and hitting a wall, and then like feeling disillusioned about everything when, like, after having a really unproductive interaction with a healthcare practitioner, and trying to juggle all of this while also trying to maintain a career and trying to maintain relationships and trying to like just make sense of your own story in your head. All of that was so incredibly relatable, even though she and I are dealing with very different things that originate from very, very different causes. And it was just so real. It was so real. And she's not telling you what to do. She's telling you what she did. And similarly to how important things can easily get lost if you are sort of just recalling or constructing your story in your head based on like what you recall. I also think that so much can get lost when people try to translate their own personal experience into broad, generalized advice for other people, because they're making the assumption that they have the ability to pick out of their own story the parts that are going to be most relevant and most important to other people and most applicable to other people. And I think a lot of the time that's just not true. And maybe even more importantly, that process of like translating experience into advice necessarily introduces a level of abstraction where things are no longer concrete. Like, it's no longer a specific example of this is a very specific concrete problem that I was having, and this is the very specific action that I did to try to address it, and this is the very specific result that it had. Like, that's a concrete thing that people can look at and like make sense of in their head and decide whether there's any like wisdom that they can glean from that experience, versus just hearing like abstract advice or results. A person. Awesome. Like if somebody's just giving you abstract advice, like, let me just use an example from the book. One of the themes of this book was the author learning to love herself, learning what self-love is, what it means, how to live that day to day. I guarantee that this is advice that every single person watching this video has heard probably hundreds of times over their life. Like, oh, you just have to learn to love yourself. Self-love is so important, blah, blah, blah. I can also guarantee that probably all of you, that phrase has zero meaning unless you have had a specific, concrete, contextual experience in your life that you can attach the abstract concept of self-love to. And if you haven't, hearing that advice is not useful. It's not useful at all. Versus, so like, she could have easily written like an advice, how to heal from CPTSD book that talks in the abstract about the concept of self-love and like abstractly what that means. But instead she just shared a play-by-play narrative of her experience and what happened to her, and it gives a very like a concrete example of what self-love and the journey to find it can actually look like and has actually looked like in a real human life with all of the surrounding context and how that actually impacted her physical and mental health and helped her overcome the struggles she was having. So yeah, I am such a huge fan of nonfiction books or just stories of any kind that stop short of doing that, you know, trying to translate experience into advice thing, and just stay in the experience, just stay in this is what happened to me. Because like people are smart. If somebody is, you know, reading a book or watching a video and they have some kind of chronic illness, or like whether it be physical or mental or some other struggle that they're having, they're looking for help, they're looking for advice, they're looking for wisdom. And if there's any wisdom to be gleaned from your story, like people are going to be able to pick up on that and apply it to their lives. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong about that, maybe I'm giving people too much credit, but yeah, I really think it's so much more valuable to just have the concrete examples, have the experience that still has all of the content in there and hasn't been, you know, pre-abstracted. So yeah, all that to say, wonderful, wonderful book, highly recommend. Really, really, really inspiring. Just to like just a very real success story, like not one of the ones that almost seem too good to be true, where like I don't know, a lot of the success stories that I was exposed to early in my chronic illness journey were like, okay, person is diagnosed with IBD, they do the medications and stuff, they stop working, they get sicker and sicker, and then the doctors are like, no, there's nothing else you can do, this is incurable. And then they hear about this diet and they're like, oh my gosh, it was the food all along. And then they try this diet and it's like kind of hard, but they just do the diet and then they're better and they've cured it. And like, that's awesome. Like I'm glad that happens to people. I don't know how common it is. It seems to be common among people who then go on to become like food nutrition gurus on the internet. And you know, it would make sense for there to be a connection there. I feel like it's not that common among the rest of the general population. Human health is complicated, and I don't know, at least for me, I'll speak for myself, I guess I can't speak for anybody else. Usually trying one thing is not enough. And I feel like these more complex, like winding journeys to healing are often perceived as like not as valuable to tell because it's not as, I don't know, not as like, it doesn't read as much like a cure, like, oh, I cured myself of this, because it wasn't like one thing. You have a problem, you apply X, and then you're better. It's relational, it's a journey, it's iterative. And so yeah, I think that stories like that are really, really powerful. Highly recommend the book if you are struggling with literally any chronic physical or mental illness, because I do think that oftentimes, maybe even most of the time, maybe even all of the time, probably not all of the time, those things are connected. And I really think that anybody who is, you know, struggling with that kind of stuff could probably find value from this book. So yeah, I hope you all have a good rest of your day, and yeah, I'll see you tomorrow.